We're live. Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm Michael Makovsky. I'm the President and CEO of JINSA. Thanks for joining us for our weekly discussion on the conflict in the Middle East. Now, we the subject of today will be a little different. Obviously, there was all these reports, and there's reports today. It seems like right before we started this webinar that it seems like there's an agreement for a ceasefire and a hostage deal in Gaza. It seemed like it was concluded yesterday, and then the reports obviously that there were some last minute problems that the Israelis said was coming from the Hamas side. But current report suggests that has been resolved, and that the Israeli cabinet, is going to vote on it starting Saturday night, and then I think the High Court has 24 hours their petitions on this issue. So it seems like there's a little more delay. If everything does get approved, there'll be a little more delay than I think folks yesterday were expecting, and the reports that the Biden administration is upset about this delay. Now, let me just give just a couple basics about what we understand the hostage deal is, and then I'm going to start the discussion. I'm joined, as we usually are, by JINSA's distinguished fellow, General Yaakov Amidror, among other things, a former national security advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And we're also joined today by John Hanna, the Randi and Charles Wax senior fellow here at JINSA. His last government position, he was national security advisor to Dick Cheney, but he's worked in different positions in government. And thank you very much, John and General Amidror, for joining us. And thanks, everybody. We have a large crowd today for joining us to discuss this. So let me just say a few basic things before we turn to you, General. And you could correct me because we're trying to piece together what this agreement is. I think something still we don't know yet, of course. And please highlight what we don't know. But what it seems like, based on press reports that we do know, is that there'll be there's apparently an agreement between the Israelis and Hamas. And again, the Israeli cabinet has not voted on this yet, but at least between the negotiators on a deal with 3 phases. The first phase will be 42 days long. On the first official day of the ceasefire, Hamas will free 3 hostages, another 4 on the 7th day. Overall, in this first phase of 42 days, they will release 33 hostages, female civilians, soldiers, children, and civilians over 50. If all those 33 are filled with live hostages, it'll be all live hostages. If in those categories they run out, they will, with live hostages, my understanding is they'll move on to deceased hostages. In return, Israel will release, I've seen different numbers on this, so please correct me, General, if I'm wrong, or John, but there's obviously large ratios between Palestinian prisoners that Israel will release and Israelis. There's something like 2,000 terrorists, I think, that are going to be released. None are Nukba, Hamas special forces, none who participated on October 7th attack. But it could include, I've seen numbers ranging from 110 to 250 prisoners that were serving life sentences in Israeli prisons. There'll be a gradual reduction of of Israeli forces, including in the Philadelphia corridor. And then there'll be negotiations on phase 2, beginning on the 16th day of phase 1. They're supposed to, in phase 2, Hamas was supposed to release the remaining male hostages, soldiers and civilians, in exchange for yet to be negotiated number of Palestinian prisoners. and then a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. There's a phase 3. The bodies of deceased Israeli hostages will exchange for the bodies of deceased Palestinian fighters. There'll be an implementation of reconstruction plan in Gaza. There's a lot more details I'm not mentioning. There's a lot of, it's a complicated agreement based on what we've seen already in the press, but this is my understanding. And so let me turn to you, General. First, correct anything that I said was incorrect.
I think that
Please give me your assessment of how you look at this deal overall.
I think that you didn't mention something which is very important, that the corridor, the Netzarim Corridor,
Yes.
will be evacuated by the IDF.
Yeah.
And there will be some checkpoints to ensure that weapons is not coming to the north part of Gaza Strip with the population which will move probably from the south into the north. It's not yet complete what exactly will be the checkpoint and who will be responsible for that. Someone told me that it might be American private company. I don't know. But the essence of that is that the Palestinians can go back to the north part of Gaza. That it's around 1 million Palestinians, and Israel will remain along the border in no man's area, which will be between 700 meters to 1 kilometer.
Right.
And in Philadelphia, we will change the way that the forces are there, but we will remain in Philadelphia. At least for the first 42 days. Then the negotiations will include what will happen in Philadelphia. And will be evacuation of Palestinians, wounded Palestinians through the Rafah passage into Egypt in groups. I don't remember how many in each group. This is basically the agreement. The agreement guarantee release of 33, including bodies of dead Israelis. We don't know how many of them are alive and how many of them are not alive. The numbers that the people are speaking here is around 2/3 alive Israelis and 1/3 not alive dead Israelis. And then it means that it is around half of the numbers that we know exist in the hands of Hamas, around half. For Israel, it's a bad agreement. We cannot hide it. There is no any reason to minimize it. It's a bad agreement. Israel is losing the ability to destroy Hamas totally. Israel is losing the ability to continue the momentum. And what will happen after the 42 days, no one knows. The expectations in Washington and in Cairo and in Doha is that Israel will agree to the second phase, in which we will have to retreat totally from Gaza, and that means the end of our ability to fight Hamas. And we don't know what was agreed between us and the Americans about Hamas in the future, because Americans are saying that Hamas will not control Gaza. I don't see anyone who can control Gaza when Hamas is in this situation. I don't see anyone who can get in and fight Hamas other than Israel. I don't see anyone who is ready to do it, and I don't see anyone who can do it. So in reality, it means that Hamas will continue to control Gaza. Yes, it's true that Hamas lost, 80% of its military capabilities. They don't have the ability to produce new weapon systems here and there. Maybe there is remains of some facilities, but basically the system was distracted. They lost around between half and 2/3 of their forces. Out of 40,000, at least 20,000 had been killed. And if you take the statistics, probably there are another 20 which had been injured severely, and in the health system in Gaza, they cannot come back to the battlefield. Hamas is recruiting new soldiers, but without experience, without training, without commanding officers. They lost most of their commanders. So it will be much, much weaker Hamas, strong enough to prevent from anyone coming from the outside to get control in Gaza, but still not a threat to Israel. And I believe that according to the agreement that we have with the Americans, whenever we identify attempt by Hamas to build or to build any facility or to build capabilities, we will be allowed to destroy it. Otherwise, it will be a catastrophic agreement, and I don't believe that we can agree to such situation. This is the question that every Israeli is asking: what is in the agreement which was not published between us and America about Gaza and about Iran? Because the expectation is that the Americans will give us more help to deal with Iran in the future. My assessment is that at the end of the day, Israel's interest is to evacuate Gaza, to release all the hostages, and to wait to the next mistake of Hamas, and to go to big operation in Gaza without hostages in Gaza, and that will change the whole ability of the IDF. And we will have to make chapter 2, and in chapter 2 to use the opportunity that there are no alive hostages inside Gaza, and to distract Hamas completely. Otherwise, it will be a historical mistake.
Well, let me ask you before I go to John, I want to just follow up on those comments. First of all, do you think we'll even get to, and you said yourself, do you think the parties will get to a phase 2?
Yes, the negotiations will begin probably after the second week. And my assessment is that the pressure from the outside and from within Israel to release all the other hostages will be very strong. And I think that at the end of the day, to make halfway will be a mistake. A kind of a selection that the Israeli society will not allow to happen. And in the second phase, it's only soldiers probably, or some men in the age of the military service. And the pressure here will be morally very strong to continue and to release them. And I can understand why.
I was asking one Israeli general yesterday about this, and he said, look, he distinguishes between the soldiers and the civilians. He said soldiers have signed up, but the civilians did not for this. He would do whatever he can to get all the civilians out, but unfortunately, if some of the soldiers don't, he looks at it differently. But you think Israeli society does not look at it that way, that they...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. One other thing, and then I want to get to John on this, so is... just so I understand, if I understand you correctly, and you mentioned Iran, which I appreciate because I think we all understand, and we've been talking about here at JINSA a long time, for a while now. The issue right now, I think I think if you ask Netanyahu, my guess would be, what's your most important strategic priority right now? Is dealing with Iranian nuclear facilities. There's a great opportunity here for various reasons, given what Israel's done to the proxies, what they've done inside Iran. You have a new U.S. administration, more sympathetic. Could you make an argument then that what you just said, do what you can, get all the hostages out, and then deal with the Iran issue, and then come back to revisit Gaza at some point? I mean, is that a credible argument in favor of a deal?
Look, we learn that there is connection between the fronts. Look, this deal was on the table in May. It was not accepted by Hamas. What happened since then? First, Hamas suffered many casualties, including Sinwar and so on and so forth. But I think not less important is the axis is weaker, because what happened with Hezbollah and what happened with Iran. And Hamas understand that he is in a weak point now. And if there is no agreement, we will use the weak situation of the axis to go on Gaza and to concentrate on Gaza. And we begin to move forces from Lebanon into Gaza, because in Lebanon we have a ceasefire and we know what we want to achieve, and we don't need all these ground forces there. So, and the same is about the future. If we have an agreement which release all the hostages, and then from now on, Hamas will have to face the IDF without the hostages, which was kind of insurance that we will not destroy and destruct everything. Because we knew that where the hostages are, we are not going in. I think that will be an opportunity, and we have to make a decision then, a strategic one. Do we prefer to go and to continue with Hamas and do destructive, or saying Hamas is not a threat to Israel now? It's a problem inside Gaza Strip. It will wait. We cannot be much stronger in the future because of the situation which is there. Philadelphia is closed and so on and so forth. Let's deal with Iran, and then we'll come back to Hamas. And when Hamas without Iran or after Iran will suffer from our attack and will be in much weaker position, it will be easier to deal with Iran as well, with Hamas as well. So we will come to the junction in which we will have to decide what is the priority now. If we are finished to build to make all our preparations for Iran, probably Iran will be first. If we don't and we need more time, it's a good time to continue with Hamas.
All right, I'm going to come back to you on that. John, let me get you involved. If you have first any comments on anything, obviously recognizing there's Americans, it's a little harder to assess. Or it might be inappropriate to assess whether it's a good deal or a bad deal, since it's Israelis that are dealing. Of course, there are American hostages, so America has an interest in what happens to them, and obviously, we want to get all the Israeli hostages back. But anyway, how do you look at this? And you have any comments on what General Amidror was saying?
Yeah, I basically agree with General Amidror that the downsides to this deal are enormous after 15 months of war. Whether it's 1,000 or 2,000 Palestinian prisoners and terrorists get released, we know that some percentage of those will find a way to return to one battlefield or another against Israel or against America, who knows? Again, you always run into this in every hostage situation when you're paying such an enormous price to get your own people back. You're, of course, inevitably, there's nothing you can do about it, incentivizing more of this kind of activity to be used against Israelis, Americans, any sort of decent civilized society that values human life and the life of its own citizens and actually feels an obligation to them. And in this situation, given the horrors of October 7th and the failure to defend those Israeli communities down in the South, I think there's an extra obligation and sense of guilt on the part of the Israeli leadership and the IDF that they have to go above and beyond in order to keep faith with Israeli society. My sense, I think you hit on it, Mike, that this is just a tortuous decision, enormously painful, but it's one that the Israeli people have to make. And I have to say, I know it's an incredibly divisive within Israel, but I do have a sense that at least in recent months, all of the polling that I've looked at shows that a majority of Israelis, if they have to choose, are prioritizing the return of those hostages over the complete annihilation of Hamas, however you define it. So I do think, and Israel's going to be giving up ground. Who knows, 1 million people could return to the north now. I do think everybody, including my guess is President Trump is going to have an interest now that he has backed this deal. He's claiming enormous credit for pushing it across the finish line. Quite rightfully, I think there's credit to be claimed by the Trump effect on this. But now he inherits the deal, which has still yet to be executed and implemented in all its different phases. And so my guess is he's going to now be invested in seeing this deal succeed all the way through phase 2. He's not going to want to see a restart of this war on his watch, especially if you've got 1 million people back in the north. I don't think it's going to be easy for Israel to go back in if they have to clear that area out again. That would be an extremely difficult decision. So my guess is that, for the moment, Hamas is going to be able to claim that it survived. Israel will achieve one of its major war objectives, God willing, in the return of the hostages, but at the cost, at least in the short term or medium term, of achieving one of its other major war objectives, which was the annihilation of Hamas, both in its military and its governing components. Very hard to see how you get to a new governance in Gaza, to a new security system in Gaza, if Hamas and these remnants are still around, although President Biden and the incoming Trump administration are still talking about a Gaza free of Hamas governance. But it's just not at all clear, if you don't have the IDF there doing the job of destroying Hamas, what's the mechanism? Is Hamas going to negotiate itself out of power and surrender and demilitarization in Gaza? I doubt it. The only piece of leverage we have is that there's going to be a lot of people clamoring to rebuild parts of Gaza, to begin reconstructing it, to begin sending in aid. Are we going to do that without any conditionality? Or is the international community, Israel, the United States, going to demand that we're not doing any of this unless Hamas agrees to surrender, give up its arms, demilitarize, and allow some new government and security authority to come in and start administering Gaza? I think it's a long shot, but people talk in those terms. It could be a fantasy. So I do think we're going to end up, in this world where nobody's going to be particularly happy. But if you were going to take this risk, I've got to say, thank God, I think Israel's in a better position to take this risk now than it was 6 months ago when this deal was first proposed, because at that point in time, Israel looked like it was still very much on the defensive, on its back foot, getting bogged down. Fast forward the last 3 months, it has transformed the region, restored a lot of its deterrence, and it looks like the strong horse right now. Whatever Hamas can claim about surviving, there's no doubt, as a military force, as a terror army inside of Gaza that can threaten Israel with another October 7th like attack, that's off the table for a long time to come. And if Israel does many of the things it should do, obviously it should have done before October 6th, really fortify that border with Gaza, reinforce those communities that live there so they can engage in their own self-defense, and lock down, come up with a solution to that Egyptian border, which I haven't heard yet. I mean, but that's going to be critical. And the United States has got to demand, together with Israel, that the Egyptians do whatever is necessary to make sure that that border is completely locked down. I don't think Hamas can pose a serious strategic threat to Israel like it did on October 7th for a very long time to come, particularly if Israel builds up its intelligence assets and networks inside of Gaza, which I hope it's now been doing or is going to be doing with all these prisoners it had, and other means. That the only threat Hamas will still pose is really to the people of Gaza and to getting to some kind of day after in Gaza. And in the meantime, I just hope, like General Amidror, that we can refocus this together, the United States and Israel, with Gaza kind of on the back burner for the time being, on the Iranian priority, and really take advantage of that. I don't know if, the way we're leaving Gaza, it provides any opportunities on the Israeli-Saudi normalization front as well, but I think we've really got to look at that, particularly if Hamas is going to refuse to surrender and demilitarize. It's not Israel's fault, it's Hamas's fault, and I hope the Saudis can come off their demands for what needs to happen in Gaza and in the future regarding this demand of theirs for a two-state horizon, and Israel and Saudi can get back to the business of a normalization deal in the context of a much, much tougher American-Israeli policy toward the Iranian threat, and a real commitment to try and deal with that.
I wonder, I want to go to General Amidror. I'm going to come back to you about the Saudi issue, and I want to come back to you, John, about Trump's role in this and his envoy Witkoff, which has, come up a lot here, certainly in the States. But General Amidror, let me go back to you first. Let me just pick.
If I may say something about this, I think that if the Americans will look for opportunity to connect the Gaza to the Saudi business, these negotiations from the 16th day, which is a week after the inauguration of the new administration, will be a good connection. If it will be clear in Israel that if we are giving up Gaza because of the second phase and the hostages release, and that will be connected to the broadening the Abraham Accord and to bring in the Saudis, that will be a good opportunity for America to show both that it can achieve a real ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, substantial change from what we have now, which is only for 42 days, and to bring the Saudis in. And together, it might be something that it will be easier to deal with and to have an agreement about. And it will be, for sure, it will be easier for the Israelis to be more flexible. At the end of the day, the ability of America to bring the Saudis in is very important, and if it will be connected within through timetable or decisions to the full retreat from Gaza, it will be much easier for Israel to agree to. But it's a big opportunity for the United States of America.
But let me ask them, General, if the U.S. does that, wouldn't that delay? Maybe I misunderstood you, but wouldn't that delay trying to conduct moving to a chapter 2, as you put it, for Gaza? Or are you just going to concede that Israel won't, finish demolishing Hamas?
That for sure is not connected to any decision in the future that might, if Hamas make mistakes, which will allow Israel to destroy Hamas. If Hamas will change and demilitarization of the Gaza Strip and so on and so forth, that might change the whole character of the relation between Israel and the Gaza Strip. I don't see it happening. I don't see Hamas ready to give up its weapon and to be declared as non-jihadist organization. It's part of its DNA. It's not Hamas anymore. So here, what the Americans can do is to connect the second stage, and then the third stage, which is connected more to to rebuilding Gaza and investing in Gaza and so on and so forth. That should be connected to the demilitarization. The world will not invest in Gaza without demilitarization of Gaza. That will be a huge burden for Hamas if he's ready to give up the rebuilding of Gaza because he is not agreed to give all the weapon and so on and so forth. So I think it's two different issues. For the second stage, which is leading to permanent ceasefire and Israeli evacuation from Gaza, it's about relations with Saudi Arabia. That will come as a compensation for Israel. For the third part, which is rebuilding Gaza, here the demand should be from Hamas. How Hamas is changing itself, only then the Arab world and the other parts of the international community will be ready to invest in Gaza. Because it will be a huge mistake not to connect it, because if that's not happening in the third stage, Gaza doomed to be destructed again. It will be stupid to invest in Gaza without the radicalization of Gaza. Because if Hamas will remain the same organization, it will take a year, 2, I don't know, 3 it will come again, and we will have to act again. So I think it's two different moments. One is about permanent ceasefire and evacuation of Israel from Gaza. That should be connected to bringing in the Saudis into full agreement with Israel. The third part is about Gaza, not about Israel. It's about rebuilding Gaza. And then the demand should be from Hamas.
Yeah, Mike, let me just say on that third phase on demilitarization and de-radicalization, I would just, everybody ought to get out their the Trump deal of the century, the peace plan that he unveiled in January 20th, because it's got an entire section on Gaza that says nothing can be done in Gaza until there's demilitarization and de-radicalization in terms of any assistance or help, and Hamas has to be gone. So it's entirely consistent with what we're saying, and the president ought to be held to it, and I think he'd endorse it. And my guess is that within this context of trying to get the Saudis and Israel back in line on a normalization track, that Trump peace plan from 4 years ago could make a reemergence as a possible starting place or bridging place for to provide that kind of diplomatic cover as a starting point for some kind of negotiation that would allow Saudi Arabia and Israel then to do whatever it is they need to do in terms of getting past the normalization hump.
Do you, General, let me ask you, the General, so let me just go back just a bit for a second. So you would like, if I understand you correctly, though, you said it was a bad deal, but if it was tied to Iran, and what would you want to see that the minimum Israel is getting from the United States on Iran to help do this deal? What do you think? Is it just a military support, or would it be collaboration on a strike?
Of course, from our point of view, the more the Americans will be involved,
yeah,
they have capabilities that Israel don't have and will not have. And we know our limitations. But what is, from my point of view, is the minimum, is a list of need that Israel should provide America to say, guys, that's what we need to act by ourselves in Iran. If you provide that list, we prefer that you will come with us. But if you send us alone to solve the problem, that's what is needed. And I think that this is part of the negotiation that should take place between the United States of America and Israel. I don't see anyone stopping Iran without kinetic attack. And for kinetic attack, 1,500 kilometers from home, we need some capabilities that we don't have and the Americans have, and we can buy them, or it can be leased to Israel.
Yeah, JINSA has talked about like KC-46 air refueling tankers.
It's
also
a good example. It's a good example of something which is there. There are more issues on the list. This is the minimum. The minimum is to come to the Americans and say, guys, we think that you should combine us, and we should combine and act together in Iran. You don't want? At least give us what is needed for us to do the job.
And then Israel pivots to either dealing with Gaza in some way, whether it's military action or demilitarization, reconstruction, deal with the Saudis. Is this how you see the choreography?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Let me ask you, and then I'll go back to John. But I guess just stepping back a little bit more on, if this was such a bad deal, what do you think was realistic that could have happened? What kind of deal do you think maybe was achievable? Or do Israel obviously has kept prosecuting the war in Gaza. They've been losing, as you know better than I do, a number of IDF soldiers lately. There've been higher casualties lately. Is it just, do you think that, I guess it's going to get to something I'm going to ask John about the U.S. Could the U.S. have played a better role? President Trump or President-elect Trump, threatened, said all hell to pay. But some people question whether, he really wanted to implement that and he just wanted a deal. Some people made that criticism. Do you think the U.S. could have pressured parties more
No, Mike, look, I don't like this kind of argument.
Counterfactual. Okay,
I
fine.
mean, what we are dealing with this deal more than a year,
Yeah.
and both sides try to achieve the best deal for themselves. And now, what to say? Oh, if we did that or that, I don't know. No one knows. There is no answer to your question. This is the deal. It's a bad one, but it's the only one through which we can get out 32, 33 hostages. And I think that morally, it should be done. By the way, there are now many demonstrations in Israel against the deal because they say, "What about the other soldiers and so on and so forth?" Many people don't like it because it is clear that Israel is losing the ability to distract Hamas, as we promised to ourselves that that's what will be done. But we found ourselves in a situation that that is the only way to get the hostages because from the minute that it was clear that if the IDF is closing and coming nearby hostages in the Gaza Strip, they immediately will be assassinated by the guards, and we understood that there is no military way to get them, and we had to make a decision, a very tough one. Do we give up the hostages' life, or we are making the deal?
I should add, I spoke to one parent of a hostage, although his son was killed, soldier, and he was critical of the deal because his son is not, the body of his son is not going to come out in the first phase. And I guess some people say, why do they have to have these phase deals? Why couldn't you just get them all out at once? But I guess Hamas would, as much as Hamas has been decimated, it's not enough for them to make that kind of agreement.
I don't know. What I learned is that the best deal is the one which was not achieved.
Yeah.
Because you can put all your thoughts and hopes and so on and so forth in the deal which was not. This is the deal. Obviously, it's a bad one, but the one should be signed because there is no other way to release the hostages. And from the within the Israeli society, that was very important. And Israeli democracy, the government should hear what the people should say.
John, let me ask you a little more on this on the U.S. side because there has been, you see, there's some criticism. Uh, see it on the right in the U.S., but you see it from others as well. Other critics of Trump, President-elect Trump, of course, there are many of those, saying, "Oh, he talked a tough game, but in the end, he just wanted to, uh, he just wanted a deal before he was inaugurated, and be kind of like a Reagan moment." Like Reagan had with the release of the Iranian hostages, then a release when he was the day of his inauguration, I think, or the morning. What do you think of that sort of comments? And that also there've been some criticism that his new special envoy Witkoff, who has no experience in the region but is a businessman, Jewish guy, came down. There have been reports he came down too, very hard on Bibi.
Right. First of all, I know there's a bit of a narrative developing that Witkoff has kind of gone rogue on Trump or something like that. I would dismiss that entirely. It's obvious that he and Trump are extremely close. I think they've talked about him as his best friend. Trump brought him out at a press conference a week ago and said what a fantastic job he was doing and getting involved in these negotiations. And he just put out, I think, on Truth Social or on Twitter or X, a tweet of I believe, a Times of Israel article in which the headline is Arab officials say, Trump had more impact. His guy had more impact in a day than the Biden administration has had in months in terms of getting this deal done. So I think the president is quite pleased with this. I do believe it. He clearly had the Reagan, somebody put that Reagan precedent in his mind that this was something that he could impact, he could achieve, he could declare as a victory even before he came into office. And he, like Reagan before him 44 years ago, right around the time of his inauguration would be able to demonstrate that aura of strength and power and presence of America in the region. Just simply the fact of his election, his personality, his issuing a single sentence of warning about all hell to pay can actually get a deal done in a few weeks that had been waiting around for more, close to a year to get done, and other people couldn't get it done. He got it done. And I do think, I can't say this for sure, but he's made clear for weeks and months that the Gaza conflict has made him uncomfortable. He thinks it's a bad narrative for Israel. He probably thinks it's a bad narrative for the United States, given how close we are to Israel, all these pictures of suffering Palestinians. He sees it probably as a smaller conflict that really doesn't have that much to do with American national interest necessarily. It looks like Israel's completely devastated these guys. They're not coming back in a long time to threaten Israel. So let's get this off my table so I don't have to spend a huge amount of time on it, so we can get on to the really big things that I want to do, which is negotiating a peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia and getting on top of the Iranian nuclear program, either to force them into a real, much better nuclear deal, which I think is really problematic and risky, but you can see the president leaning in that direction. And in fact, Secretary of State nominee Rubio kind of reiterated yesterday in his testimony they're open to a new arrangement with Iran, although you've got to do it with eyes wide open because the Iranians may only be looking to buy time, given how weak they are. Or you do it by military force, either together with Israel or giving Israel everything it needs to take care of the Iranian nuclear program for the moment. So I don't think Trump ever had it in his mind to negotiate, get into the details of negotiating a much better deal. I think getting a victory before he enters office, having Gaza sort of put on a back burner so he doesn't have to invest a lot of energy or time in it. I think those were from his standpoint, the two motivating factors, as well as obviously, the humanitarian one of getting those people out and getting those Americans back. And we still need to see in what tranche are those Americans going to be in that phase one, or is it going to have to wait until phase two for some of them?
Yeah. General, first of all, someone asked a question that I want to bring up is, Mary Boyce asked, what's the state of the tunnels in Gaza? They've been all destroyed, or they're still finding them and destroying them? Oh, we can't. Yeah, you're muted, General. You're muted. Thank you.
Not all of them have been destroyed. The tunnels which remain in Gaza are not endangering Israel because most of them are not close to the border. They can be used in the future by Hamas to hide and to operate from, but only within Gaza. There is no any threat from the remaining tunnels inside Gaza because none of them, as far as we know, are even close to the border. So it might be used in Hamas in the future, but mainly for defensive needs.
Okay. Do you just picking up on something John said? It's been some people have raised in the media in the last few days is that it's harder for Prime Minister Netanyahu to say no to Trump than it is, at least at this stage, than it has been to Biden. Would you agree with that? Or
I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know what is hard and what is easy. It's a gossip more than real assessment. I know that this plan was on the table since May, well before it was clear who will be the next president of the United States of America. And the answer, and Israel said yes to the deal, and it was Hamas, as was declared by Kirby and Blinken himself, that it was Hamas which didn't agree, and it was not connected at all to Trump. Here we met representatives of both administrations, so it was easier for Israel to agree because when we know that we understood that what will be agreed between us and the Americans will be real continuation in the next administration. It's much easier for Israel.
Okay. Let me ask you something else.
Mike, it just is worth underscoring that one point about just the historic circumstance of an incoming administration and an outgoing administration working, hand in glove in the way they have on such a major issue. I think it's unprecedented, never happened in our history before, especially between two administrations who couldn't be more, unlike each other and disagree on everything. And yet on this really critical, important issue did come together and actually achieve something. It's just worth noting in passing, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's true.
And it was much more convenient for Israel that it were representatives of both administrations.
I'm picking up another question, Josh Kazan. I guess what would you see as a trigger of Israel going, let's say, assuming they go through these phases, or at least the first couple, what would be the trigger for Israel, you think, for Israel going back in? And I know it's been raised. Well, anyway, what would you see? Would it just be a few?
I don't know. It's very much depends on the circumstances on the ground. What will be the second phase agreement? What will be the third phase agreement? And what reality will be on the ground when it will happen? In principle, what's important for Israel is we don't have any interest in Gaza, but one, that will not be a launchpad that will be used against Israel. That's all. It's very easy. So whatever will be, we have to have the freedom to destroy any attempt by Hamas or any other organization, not just Hamas, any other organization or group of people, to build facilities that might be used against Israel or to launch an attack on Israel in real time. So I don't know what will be the circumstances on the ground. I don't know what will be the circumstances inside Gaza. I can say in principle, this is what we need. The ability to prevent any attempt to build or to use Gaza against Israel, to build capabilities in Gaza or to use Gaza as a launchpad against Israel. What will be the circumstances? I don't know. So I don't have an answer to the question, but the principle.
You find,
Mike, can I just say on that, one dynamic to watch will just be what happens with this first tranche. What is it that we do get? How traumatic are the stories? Are those little babies dead or alive? You don't know exactly.
The Beavis children, kids, for instance.
Yeah, the society is already on such a razor's edge that and so traumatized that getting back, if these horror stories are as bad as some of them are, it has its own effect as a variable on the country's position and attitude toward things going forward. I'm not sure it changes the basic strategic arc that we've laid out, because I don't see Hamas as having a great interest in screwing up this deal, because it's been trying to get a deal where it can survive. Israel will withdraw for a long time, and it can declare some kind of symbolic victory, Pyrrhic victory. But so I don't see them, at least in the first 42 days, giving Israel a great excuse to go back in and to set the deal aside.
Yeah. By the way, I wonder, maybe this is a strange question, I guess, but the ratios here. Look, we know about the deal for Gilad Shalit, and that was like 1,100 to 1, which I'm sure Netanyahu regrets now. But the ratios I understand for this deal are something like 30 Palestinian prisoners for each civilian hostage and 50 for each female soldier or something. I mean, the ratios are amazing. And I wonder what, if you're an Arab, or Palestinian, I should say, or Arab, in just somewhere in the region, and you see that Israel is willing to pay such a high price to get each one of their hostages back. I'm not talking about from a strategic standpoint. I understand how this incentivizes hostage taking, but I don't know. I wonder what the lessons they draw for their society and what it suggests about how they look at Israeli society, how much Israeli.
So one liberal expert in the previous deals wrote that it is symbolizing the racism of Israel.
I saw that.
That one Jew is equivalent to 50 Arabs.
Right. I don't know if you think that's the way they're going to read it, or that they're going to say the Israelis value life more than our societies, or that the Palestinians, the Hamas is better negotiators. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not in this.
Yeah.
I'm
All right. All right. One last thing, and we'll conclude. I guess is well, actually, I've kind of gone through everything I really want to ask, so I'll just leave it to you. Do you have any concluding comments, General? I don't know.
Yes, I think that it is a very crucial moment for the Israeli society. There is majority within the community, the Jewish community, for that agreement, but many don't like it, and we will have to see how we are continuing from here together, because it's not the end of the war. We will continue to have friction in Lebanon. We have to deal with Iran. The Houthis still launching missiles into Israel, and we'll see what will happen there. So I think that for the Israeli society, it's very important. By the way, one party said that they are leaving the government. It's a Ben Gvir party. They're resigning from the government. I don't know what will happen with Smotrich. It's crucial now for Bibi to keep him in. Otherwise, he will have very slim majority, and it's not enough to run the country. And it is a very delicate time for the Israeli society.
You, General, I guess we've commented on this before. It's interesting that obviously there's been a disparity in the intelligence that Israel had on Gaza and Hezbollah. There are also no hostages in Lebanon, while there have been obviously in Gaza. But how much is it surprise you, even given those facts, that Israel was so successful so quickly against Hezbollah, recognizing the objectives are different as well than it has been against Hamas?
If you remember, in one of our briefings, I said that Hezbollah is 10 times stronger than Hamas, but the IDF is 20 times better ready to fight Hezbollah. We prepared ourselves for a war in Lebanon, not a war in Gaza. We didn't have military plan to conquer Gaza in the 7th of October. We had to prepare one in the first 2 weeks before we entered with the ground forces into Gaza. So the preparations gave us many advantages in Lebanon. I was not surprised by any of our operations because I knew in advance that was planned. I was surprised by the tempo of achieving it. I thought that it will take more time, but I was not surprised by and remember that the ground forces didn't go deep into Lebanon. They went into an area which was well prepared during the exchange of fire with Hamas in the last year before the Eid al-Biper. And the area was very well prepared for the ground forces by the special forces which came in and out during these months in the exchange of fire in the north. There was a big gap between our capabilities in intelligence and operational capabilities in the south relative to what we had in the north.
John, you have anything to conclude before any concluding remarks?
I guess, Mike, I would just reinforce the idea that I do think, potentially one benefit of doing this very painful deal is what General Amidror said, the importance of trying to heal some of these rifts in Israeli society and reestablish some kind of at least centrist consensus that that people are agreed on something in order to be able to move forward to the big challenges ahead, and particularly the Iranian challenge. The only other thing I'd say, and maybe this is unfair because I haven't looked at all the social media, but it's worth looking at the way Hamas leaders have talked about this deal, the way they've celebrated as a great underscoring of the victory of October 7th, that they will do it again at some point in time, that the mission hasn't changed, that yes, we honor our martyrs, but who cares if we had to lose 45,000 people? We're triumphant and moving on to destroy Israel. And you see some of these pictures, frankly, on the streets in Gaza. I don't know how representative they are of people firing guns and calling for Israel's destruction and celebrating as if, you know, nothing has been learned at all by the destruction of this organization. I'm sure there are a lot of Palestinians in Gaza who are angry as hell at Hamas, but aren't able to say too much about it. You hope we'll eventually hear from them. But it's important to keep in mind, you know, and the task ahead in terms of de-radicalization, just how different these societies are at some level, and the people who lead them. Picture of Israel on the one hand in this anguish trying to save its people at this enormous price, versus Hamas, who has sacrificed so many tens of thousands of its own women and children and people on behalf of this this horrific crazy extremist mission of trying to destroy Israel.
Yeah. You know, if Hamas does survive this, at least for a while, it does raise questions about what Secretary of State Blinken was talking about the other day about this time-bound Palestinian state that they're going to pursue. But that's a discussion for another webinar. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank General Amidror and John Hanna for discussing this issue. Obviously, we'll see what happens over the weekend. If this still holds, this deal, and it proceeds and the cabinet in Israel approves it, and we'll obviously be discussing that and more in the region next week. I hope everybody joins. Thanks for joining us. Everyone have a good rest of the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.